Okay, welcome to this unit. This is a unit I want to devote to thinking about euthanasia, about physician-assisted suicide as well. This is the idea of killing, medical killing, killing upon request. So we'll look at some of the arguments that people have given pro and con. I want to start off with a little bit about just an introduction. So the first piece to think about is the views of euthanasia, and you can see several people starting off with it's appropriate way to ease people's suffering. It's a right, all the way down to some people thinking of it as a duty of older citizens. Not clear when it becomes their duty. That's certainly not that I wouldn't call that a majority opinion. Okay. Um, Thinking a little bit about the history of euthanasia. Euthanasia as a movement is not that old, but euthanasia as an idea has been around for a long time. So we can start all the way back with ancient times. And in ancient times, there was a general tolerance towards euthanasia, to suicide, to assisted suicide. Um, the Greek language gives us the word euthanasia, which literally means good death. There wasn't any kind of preference for a good death being something that's natural or voluntary. The Hippocratic school, believe it or not, was one of the most opposed to this. They believed that they advocated, well-defined professional standards which didn't include euthanasia. They saw disease as a result of natural processes, and human existence as part of nature. And so their approach to death was more or less to let it happen, not to speed it up, not necessarily to slow it down. Christian views of death. So now we're into maybe the first century. They were inspired by people's deaths. Christians died heroic deaths, as we knew, and they encouraged others to die for their faith. Out of this developed a general reverence for individual life and for the dignity of self-sacrifice. And for over 16 centuries, that was more or less what people thought about in terms of death. 16th century, we see a growing rejection against this sort of reverence for individual life. We see a pessimism about morality arising, and we see a lot of materialism coming to the fore, particularly in philosophical sort of circles. Interesting enough, the use of morphine in the 19th century introduced the idea that medical treatment could be pain-free, and that even the idea came along with it that dying didn't have to be painful. Euthanasia begins to be thought about among the social elite. Okay, it's more or less an imposition though on culture. It's seen as something as a side note. Okay, that takes us into the more modern times. So in the 1930s, we see the creation of euthanasia societies, starting off in Britain, but not long after that, starting in the United States. So the United States can see its euthanasia society going way back to, I think, 1936. It's changed its name along the way. It used to be called the Euthanasia Society. Now I think then it was called Death with Dignity. I think now it's Comfort Care. Doctors at the time ignored it. They didn't see dying as a medical issue. They didn't see that it applied to them. Interesting enough, Pope Pius XII declares that refusing extraordinary treatment wasn't necessarily a violation of Christian doctrine. Some people see this as an approval of what you might call passive euthanasia, which is a very much confused term, which we'll get to in the next video. Really hard to see how the euthanasia movement played out morally, because these groups are often vague about what's the morality of what they are advocating. They won't even talk about whether death is something that's intrinsically wrong at all, wrong sometimes. It just seems to be more about a question about control. Typically, they want patients to have the right to request euthanasia. So they want that to become an option, but not required for anybody. They don't, at least they don't say that. That might be um, considered controversial. It might not get them as much press as they want. Certainly, they're probably distancing themselves from the eugenics movement, which was popular in the early part of last century, which was the idea of actually getting rid of undesirables for various reasons. Um, no articulation about who would provide euthanasia for those who want it, which is a good point to raise up. The same thing happened with the abortion question. People wanted abortion to be an option for women, and when it became an option, it was just assumed that doctors and hospitals would do it, take care of it. And when hospitals quite quickly in the 70s refused to provide abortions, because of the cost, because of the insurance nightmares, because of the legal problems, abortion moved out into the private sphere. So a clinic started arising, and abortion was given to people for profit. Same thing happened in Europe with their legalization of euthanasia. Now you have the existence of sanitariums, death houses, people setting up death houses where people can go. It's all extra medical. It's not part of the medical establishment at all. And that was, as I'm saying, it wasn't foreseen, and maybe wasn't even expected. Finally, we get to today. Um, Euthanasia is practiced in Europe. It's legal. It was legal in the Netherlands since the early 1990s. Other countries followed suit. Euthanasia has never gained much traction popularly in the US. Maybe because of our sense of individualism, it just doesn't seem to be so popular. But physician-assisted suicide has become popular. 1994 is the first state, Oregon, to legalize it. And that began a whole series of other states trying to legalize it since 1994. In the 90s, Dr. Jack Kevorkian, sometimes referred to as Dr. Death, created something he called this death machine, which he allowed people to hook themselves up to and to press the buttons to kill themselves if they wanted. So a bunch of cases, a lot of patients were very sick, not all of them though. Dr. Kevorkian was interviewed, created a tape for 60 minutes on which he dared the district attorney to take him to court over that. He had been arrested and never convicted, but this one was, the attorney general had to do it, felt like he was kind of trapped into it, and he ended up convicting him and putting in Dr. Kevorkian in jail. He was originally sentenced to 25 years, but released in 2007 and died in 2011. Death with dignity states, now we have about 9 or 10, the District of Columbia, Oregon, Washington State, California, Colorado, New Mexico, Vermont, Maine, New Jersey, and Hawaii. People like to throw Montana into that, but it's not legal in Montana. As it says there, the practice is allowed in theory. A court ruling said that they saw no reason why it wouldn't be allowed, except it's never been tried, never been challenged. So that's where we are, at least popularly, with euthanasia.